I want to give life and death, sanity and insanity. I want to criticize the social system and to show it at work at its most intense. Wow. Virginia Woolf wrote those incredibly ambitious, almost agonizing words in her diary back in 1923. She was wrestling with a manuscript that would, honestly, change literature forever. She wasn't just trying to write a simple story here, you know? She was attempting to capture the entire chaotic spectrum of human existence, and she wanted to do it all within the confines of just a single day.
Hello and welcome to this explainer. Okay, let's just dive right in because honestly, this is such a fascinating one. Today, we're exploring the brilliant, complex, and deeply psychological world of Virginia Woolf's modernist masterpiece, Mrs. Dalloway. We're going to take a real inside-out journey through this text together. We'll start out on the bustling streets of post-war London, then we'll plunge deep into the microscopic, hidden thoughts of the characters, and finally, we'll step outside the book entirely to uncover the grueling and honestly sometimes shockingly petty real-world creation of the novel itself.
All right, let's set the scene with part one, One Day in London. Just look at the sheer deceptive simplicity of this famous opening line. Mrs. Dalloway said she would buy the flowers herself. Right away, it places us firmly on the outside looking in. We're observing Clarissa Dalloway, a wealthy, privileged society hostess, just stepping out of her house to run an everyday, kind of trivial errand, picking up flowers for a party she's throwing that evening. But Woolf definitely doesn't let us stay on the surface for long. The external world she steps out into, it's far from simple. As Clarissa walks, we enter a world that is still bearing the heavy, very real scars of modernity. It's London in June 1923. 5 years have passed since the end of the First World War, but the streets are still deeply fractured. An airplane circles overhead, ominously reminding everyone of the German bombers that had recently attacked the capital. Complete strangers in hat shops look at each other and immediately think of the dead. There are orphans, widows, and shell-shocked veterans, like a character named Septimus Smith, walking the very same pavements as the high society elite. Human relations, class structures, gender roles, the whole shebang is in massive, rapid flux. To really understand this fractured world, we have to move to our next section, plunging into the mind. So, to capture all this modern chaos, Woolf realized she couldn't just use the polite, rigid writing styles of the previous century. She had to master a completely groundbreaking technique, stream of consciousness. Basically, this is the attempt to put the actual flight of the mind down on paper. Instead of a neat, orderly sequence of events, Woolf gives us the raw, unfiltered, and deeply subjective experience of living moment to moment. I mean, just think about your own internal monologue for a second. That continuous, fragmented flow of your thoughts when you're just walking down the street running an errand, that is exactly what Woolf is pulling off here. Now, traditionally, novels used an omniscient narrator. You know, that all-knowing voice that tells readers what everything means from on high, constantly passing judgment on the characters. Well, Woolf realized this was a lie. In the real world, 90% of life happens entirely inside our heads, totally hidden from others. So Woolf developed something called blended narration. It acts as a third-person voice that seamlessly slips right into the running flow of a character's psyche. She looks at Clarissa from the outside, then instantly dives into the depths of her mind, observing everything without passing any judgment. The absolutely crucial point here is how this actually looks on the page. Early in the novel, Clarissa thinks, what a lark, what a plunge. And from there, Woolf uses these extra long, rambling sentences, constant digressions, and really disjointed syntax. A single fleeting thought about the morning air spirals completely into memories of waves, trees, a former lover named Peter Walsh, and even a really odd quotation about cauliflower. It perfectly mirrors the actual messy jumble of human thought. We are thrust directly into the chaotic beauty of her subconscious. And that brings us to an even deeper layer of the story. Section 3, The Privacy of the Soul. Woolf brilliantly structures her narrative around two seemingly unconnected people, Clarissa and Septimus. They never actually meet in the novel, not once. Yet they act as two sides of the exact same coin. You see, Clarissa loves life, but she's protected by a somewhat sterile, emotionless marriage that affords her privacy. Septimus, on the other hand, is traumatized by the horrors of war. He feels entirely exposed and is being crushed by the very civilization that Clarissa represents. But despite their vast differences in class and, well, sanity, they share this deep, intuitive connection in how they perceive the world around them. Through Clarissa, Woolf explores a really profound concept of feminine creativity. Now, society might look at throwing a party as, totally trivial, but Woolf frames it as a heroic act. In a world completely reeling from the chaos and death of World War I, female-coded acts, like gathering people together, creating order, or even the careful metaphor of sewing a hat, are presented as powerful forces of life. Clarissa throws her parties as an offering, literally as a way to establish relationships, and heroically fight back against the darkness. In sharp contrast to this, we see Woolf's harsh critique of masculine authority. The men in the novel represent the rigid, imposing forces of the establishment. You have the prime minister, who's basically a symbol of superficial power, but much more dangerously, you have the doctors Holmes and Bradshaw. Woolf actually describes them as worshippers of the goddess of conversion. What that means is they have this sinister lust to override opposition and violently force their own will and their own version of sanity upon the vulnerable. They don't want to heal Septimus at all. They want to conquer his soul and force him to conform. Which leads us to this really haunting repetition. Both Clarissa and Septimus separately recall this specific line from Shakespeare, "Fear no more the heat of the sun." It reveals that both characters actually share a temptation towards suicide. For both of them, the ultimate tragedy isn't necessarily death, but the violation of their inner selves by outside forces. Septimus ultimately throws himself from a window to escape those doctors, actively choosing death to protect the ultimate independence of his soul. And when Clarissa hears of his suicide later at her party, she deeply understands and respects his choice. Okay, now let's pull the curtain back and open up the secret diaries. In our final section, we're looking at the real-world creation. The Hours Become Dalloway. The creation of this novel was a grueling, multi-year battle. The initial concept actually branched out from a 1922 short story. By 1923, she was battling with a full draft, originally titled The Hours. She wrote constantly in her diary about her intense struggles, oscillating wildly between thinking parts were pure brilliance and parts were just terrible. Finally, in late 1924, she famously retyped the entire manuscript from the start. She described this method with a sense of wonder as working with a wet brush to seamlessly blend all those fragmented parts together, which finally led to its 1925 publication. I absolutely love this quote from her diary during that period, and you really just have to feel for her struggle here. She wrote, "Laboriously drudging my mind and bringing up light buckets." Just as she was plunging into the subconscious minds of Clarissa and Septimus on the page, Woolf was brutally dredging her own mind in the real world. She constantly feared that the profound ideas she was reaching for were coming up empty, or light, when actually translated into words.
And you know what made this drudging even more agonizing? The shadow looming over her. While Woolf was struggling with her manuscript, she was also reluctantly reading James Joyce's monumental stream of consciousness novel, Ulysses. Joyce, incredibly enough, was born just 8 days before Woolf, and he was pioneering the exact same psychological realism she was attempting. He was essentially her artistic double, and quite frankly, he was beating her to the punch.
And her reaction to that was, well, let's just say it was incredibly human and deeply petty. In her private diaries and letters, Woolf unleashed this fierce, snobbish jealousy. She called Ulysses an illiterate, underbred book, even comparing it to a queasy undergraduate scratching his pimples. Ouch, right? She publicly praised parts of it, sure, but privately, she was infuriated by its raw, chaotic style, partly because it was just so radically disruptive, but also partly because she felt the intense pressure of his genius directly threatening her own legacy. But eventually, Woolf had to admit the truth. Despite her intense rivalry and, let's be honest, her snobbery, both she and Joyce were doing the exact same thing. They were, as she later framed it, smashing the windows of literature to let in fresh air. They were actively destroying the rigid, old Edwardian tools of storytelling because those tools were simply incapable of capturing the messy, complex internal reality of human nature in the modern age. And that brings us to our final thought. Through Mrs. Dalloway, Woolf forces us to confront an incredible reality about our own existence. If, as the novel suggests, 90% of life happens entirely inside our heads, in a rapid, silent stream of memories, anxieties, and fleeting joys, how well do we truly know anyone? Not just the people passing us on the street, but our own friends, our family, even ourselves? It's a profound question that Virginia Woolf brilliantly captured nearly a century ago, and it's one that still echoes every single time we pause to listen to our own minds. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep wondering and keep learning.